Hey there, I'm Pastor Zach, one of the pastors of Open Table United Church of Christ in Pottstown, PA, and we have been reading through the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So happy you're with us today because we're done with Ezra, and now we are moving on to Nehemiah. Today we're going to be talking about the first 4 chapters of Nehemiah. So if you want to pause this and read them first, by all means go ahead. If not, I'll fill you in on all the context and the important bits that I want to talk about during our Bible study. So first of all, unlike Ezra and Zerubbabel and Joshua and all those other people that we read about, Nehemiah is not a priest. He is not a scribe. He's not a scholar. He's not a prophet. He's not an aristocrat. He's a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes of Persia. Just a cupbearer, which means that he's the guy who brings the wine to the king. So at first you might think, that's kind of a lowly job. It's not. Well, it is. You're kind of like chief butler, but one of the main ways that people assassinated kings in those days, and really up until recent days, is to poison them. And what's the best way to poison somebody other than putting it in a strong drink that is already strong, like wine? So the cupbearer would have to drink the wine first before the king, just to make sure it wasn't poisoned. So every time the king ate or drank, the cupbearer put their life at risk. So super cool job, right? It also meant that you got to be next to the king at all times. So a lot of times, sort of in an informal fashion, the cupbearer would become somebody who was really close to the king, a confidant, just somebody that they knew well. It's funny. This is a job that has thousands of years old and lasted up until the modern era. There are very few jobs that remained that unchanged for that long. But anyway, the second thing that's important to know about Nehemiah is that he was a man of prayer. Prayer is going to be an extraordinarily important part of the next couple of chapters. Whereas Ezra was learned and skilled and wise, Nehemiah is just an administrator, but he is powered by prayer, by his commitment to always being in a state of prayer at all times. And we're going to see that. 14 prayers in a short 13-chapter book. So let's put us where we are. The year is 444 BCE. It's been about 100 years. No, it's been about 140 years since Jerusalem was first destroyed. It's been about 100 years since the Jews were allowed to go home. Been about 70 years since the temple was rebuilt, and about 15 years since Ezra came back to Jerusalem and reformed the whole religious landscape. So at this point in the story, Nehemiah is chilling with the king in his vacation home in the wintertime, and Nehemiah's brother comes and has a report from Jerusalem where he had just been, and Nehemiah is like, "Hey man, how's it going? How's the motherland doing?" And his brother's got nothing but bad news to report. The walls are unusable, they're crumbling, they're falling down. The gates have all been burned with fire. And presumably these were new gates that came up some point in the last 100 years since they were allowed to go home. We read before about all the turmoil that happened during the time of Ezra. So Nehemiah is distraught, and he does what he always does, and he goes to prayer. So I'm going to read you this passage from his prayer because I think it's really important. He prays, "Lord God of heaven, great and awesome God, you are the one who keeps covenant and is truly faithful to those who love you and keep your commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, which I now pray before you night and day for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins of my people Israel, which we have committed against you. Both I and my family have sinned. We have wronged you greatly. We haven't kept the commandments, the statutes, and the ordinances that you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you gave your servant Moses when you said, it is, quote, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments by really doing them, then even though your outcasts live under distant skies, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place that I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people. They are the ones whom you have redeemed by your great power and your strong hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in honoring your name. Please give success to your servant today and grant him favor in the presence of this man. So 2 things to point out here. First of all, he does the same thing that Ezra did a couple chapters ago. He recognizes the sins of his people, and he doesn't blame them for them. He doesn't say, me and my people were clean, but it's those gosh darn whatevers over there. No, he repents for the sins of his people. And even if he didn't commit them, he takes them upon himself because he is a part of that group. He understands that no person lives in a vacuum. No identity exists without a connection to other people. Within your group, within your nationality, within your religion, within your family, within your neighborhood, within your community, you, me, Nehemiah, and every person who has ever lived exists as a collective, not as an individual. The myth of individuality is a thoroughly modern and American myth. Truth be told, no one exists outside of that web of mutuality. And so with our hyper-individualistic way of looking at the world, it is so easy for us to point fingers at those people that are ruining our country, those people that are ruining our church, those people that are doing this, that, or the other, blah, blah, blah. You all heard it. You've probably done it. I know I have. But Nehemiah says this is our sin. These are our problems. And so I'm begging you to forgive us. And can you imagine the kind of power that we would have as a people if we did that? If we, as a church, took responsibility for the scars of systemic racism, knowing that it was the Christian church that created those systems. And even though it wasn't me personally, I am a part of that long line, that history, that great cloud of unfortunate witnesses. And so I need to take some responsibility for that and have that burden my soul until something is done. This is a mark of a good leader, I think. And secondly, in his prayer, he says, remember the word that you gave your servant Moses. And then he goes on to say, if you're unfaithful, I'll scatter you, blah, 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 blah. That's not actually in the Bible. Moses never said that. God never said that to Moses. That's not a quote from anything. Remember, Nehemiah didn't even really have a Bible yet. Ezra was working on that at that time. So he's speaking from oral tradition. And so we get this wonderful glimpse about how people have always recontextualized our mythic past to make sense of the place where we are today. Reading our cultural mores and our convictions backward into our ancient heroes. Like, imagine when people say that God helps those who help themselves, right? That is a thoroughly individualistic conviction. That's an American conviction that is read backwards as if that were an ancient scriptural truth. I think that was actually Ben Franklin that said that, actually. So about 5 months later, after he has been thinking and obsessing and mourning over this, he's serving dinner at this party, and the king notices that he's visibly upset. Now, that's illegal. You're not allowed to be a servant to the king at this great feast and bring everyone down by looking miserable. If the king were feeling up to it, he could have him sent to prison or killed. Kings can do whatever they want. But you can tell there's this relationship there. And so he says, what's wrong? What's going on, my friend? And he replies to him, quote, I was very afraid, and I replied, may the king live forever. Why shouldn't I seem sad when the city, the place of my family's graves, is in ruin and its gates destroyed with fire? So the king asked him, what is it that you need? And I prayed to the God of heaven, and then replied, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, please send me to Judah, to the city of my family's graves, so that I may rebuild it. Can we stop just for a second and think about that phrase? I prayed to the God of heaven and then replied. I've heard this referred to as an arrow prayer, like a quick shot to God, lacking the thought and the detail of his last prayer, but filled with even more sincerity and even more of his pure, distilled heart's desire. There's this mystical textbook in the medieval church written by an anonymous author called The Cloud of Unknowing. It's kind of, if you wanted to become a contemplative mystic in the Middle Ages, you read this book. And in that book, he talks about the most pure kind of prayer, that if you must pray with words, never use more than one. And tells the story of somebody who had fallen off of a boat and was drowning in the sea. And they're flapping their arms around and they're trying not to sink, and they see somebody up on the boat, and they don't flop there in the water and try to come up with all the reasons why they're worthy of being saved, do they? No, of course they don't. They take all of their fear, all of their anxiety, all of the death that is about to come upon them, and they put it all into a single syllable, help! And that one word, help, carries more weight with it than all of the longest treaties that you can come up with. And that is the purest prayer that a person can pray with words, according to this author. And so what Nehemiah is doing here is he is about to ask something really difficult. He's about to do something really difficult here. And what he does is he shoots a single arrow out, this arrow prayer that's just quick, straight to the heavens. Imagine in his head, he goes, oh, dear God, here I go. Or, help me out. Or whatever it was, those words that went through his mind. I find those prayers to be the most pure, the most good, the most important sorts of prayers that we can have. So I wonder if we can think about that a little bit this week. But back to our story. So in our story, Artaxerxes gives him temporary leave to go off and do the thing that he said. He made him governor of the province of Yehud. He gave him access to all the royal forests for timbers and gave him a military escort home. So he went back to Jerusalem and spent the first few nights secretly scouting the walls to see what needed to get fixed and where it needed to get fixed the most. He didn't want to draw any attention to himself. And he's a good administrator, and so he's thinking about ways to divide the labor to finish quickly. And when he finally reveals his intentions, the leaders of Jerusalem are there. They're like, yes, we got God, we got the king, we don't need anything else. I mean, meanwhile, there's local other governors who are not so happy about this. Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arab. These folks have returned to cause trouble throughout the rest of the book. They don't want Jerusalem to be rebuilt because Jerusalem rebelled last time and it brought war to the territory, and they don't want to see that happen again. So they're going to try to resist their work. So, question. If you're rebuilding the walls around an entire city, how do you organize that? How do you even begin to organize that? Well, I'll tell you how Nehemiah organized it. He organized it through buy-in. Basically, you rebuild the part of the wall that is next to your house. Everyone wants to protect their house, right? Everyone has a little slice of Jerusalem that is theirs, that belongs to them, and they want to protect that particular part. And so they're going to do it. This is their buy-in. This is the skin they have in the game. And so Nehemiah says, this family, you do this part, this family, you do that part, this family, you do that part. And chapter 3 is full of this wonderful description of every single part of the city, all the gates, all the walls that all get repaired or rebuilt by each individual family that is right there on the ground. I love it. I love the thought that every single person there had a manageable job that was immediately important to them, that was right in front of them, and that all contributed to the work of the entire thing being done. I love that. And in chapter 4, we learned that those other governors I mentioned before, they started causing trouble. They threatened the builders. They sent people to disrupt the work. So Nehemiah, again prayerfully, sent soldiers to every work site, told the builders to have a hammer in one hand and a sword on their belt, and instructed everyone to have a trumpet. And if they were ever attacked, to blow that trumpet, and everyone else who heard the trumpet would leave their hammers down, leave their part of the wall unguarded, and go defend their sisters and brothers that were being attacked on their part. So it was this way that your individual part of the wall was most important to you, but the collective work of everyone was also important. And through this kind of commitment to both the specific and the universal, they managed to finish the whole wall in 52 days. Can you imagine that? 52 days, like a month and a half. Every person there was committed to the work in front of them, but was ready to drop it in support of somebody else who needed it. And that combination of individual buy-in and collective responsibility is why it was finished so fast, and probably got a lot of extra buy-in from people who then could show off their part of their wall. Lots of initials, I imagine, were inscribed into those walls. We actually, 2007, I think, finally found a portion of this wall that, I mean, Jerusalem is this very, very full archaeological site, and so it's hard to find anything there. But they finally found a section of Nehemiah's wall. It was 15 feet wide, like thick, and probably about that tall as well. So we finally found it. Prove it. It is there. This story, unlike a lot of the things we talk about in the Hebrew scriptures, this actually happened. I don't know if it happened exactly this way, but it definitely happened. We have archaeological proof. We've got the wall now as it was built, and it's built with all of these small stones that individuals could move themselves. So you imagine just people who don't normally do this work are doing the work of the wall for themselves, for their families, for their people, and for everyone. So how about you? I wonder what your section of the wall is. What is the work that is right in front of you? What work has God put in front of you to do? And how are you doing it? Do you feel supported in that work? Do you feel like the work you're doing is contributing to something greater? And are you trying to do that work on your own? Are you trying to get buy-in from other people? Are you doing it prayerfully? What do you think? Let's talk about it.